Normally when I do reviews in Richmond, it's beautiful, relaxing, sunny and wonderful. What the hell am I doing out right now? I mean, it's just absolute madness. This is the DJI Ronin 4D, the most clever, fascinating, unique, strange camera system I think I've ever come across. At its core, it's a stabilizer, a 4-axis stabilizer, hence the name 4D, has the Z-axis here for up and down, and it has an X9 camera on there, their new camera system, and this one is a 6K sensor, full frame. So it's fascinating. It's got a great image, great stabilization. So there's a lot to cover in this review, but it's not a very long review for me for a very simple reason. And that is, this is heavy, and that causes me problems. Naturally, in a review of this, you want to see lots and lots of stabilized shots. And I can't do that because of a couple of physical issues, because I'm basically a broken man at this point in my life. When I first got this, I was heading off to Skiathos in Greece, and I put on my luggage on to check in, and as I did that, I badly twisted my right wrist, which I had left me with no strength in it at all, so I couldn't use it and had to wait for that to heal. And after it got a bit stronger, I started playing around with it again, but I found that it was really aggravating my back injury. I have 3 prolapsed discs in my lower back. I'll tell you how that happened. It's a funny story. So I've had back issues since my early 20s because of Betacam SPs and working in news. But 5 years ago, I was shooting the first episode of season 3 of CNN's The Wonderlist. We were in Amsterdam, and we were in the red light district, interviewing a prostitute in the Prostitutes Museum. And the way that these back things happen, it's basically a build-up of things. And that's basically what happened, using the gimbal a lot. And as I went to just level the tripod, it went in the most painful way it's ever gone. And I had to be carried out of the red light district in Amsterdam, which must have looked very strange because you can't get any cars down there. So anyway, this means it's been very difficult for me to film with this because it really is heavy, and the way you hold it with its design, everything, it just goes straight in there. I'm not just going to be focusing on the weight, I just want to get that out of the way, because it's actually not that heavy if you go by the actual weight. I mean, it's not far off what Lollipop weighs. But it's how you have to hold it by the grips or the top handle, because with other gimbals you can move your hands up or down the shaft. Yeah, I should have said that a different way. To find a comfortable position, especially if you need to change that shooting height. But with the Ronin 4D, you are aiming to hold it in very unnatural positions. And that's when it feels very heavy and does start to hurt. It's not just in my lower back, but in the middle of my back too. Of course, in an ideal world, this little thing would be just as good as the Ronin 4D. But I think we're a number of years away from that.
This old man came rolling home.
But there's numerous reasons why the Ronin 4D is so good and you want to make it work. Chief among them is the stabilization is amazing, and the image from the camera is gorgeous. There is going to be an 8K version coming out, but I've only used the 6K one. Most of these shots were filmed at 48 frames per second, and some even slower. This was so I could use them for slow motion if I wanted to, but I know how people complain when seeing slow motion gimbal footage, saying it doesn't show them just how well the gimbal works. Well, that's why I'm showing you a mixture here. A big part of why the stabilization is so good is the built-in Z-axis. This removes pretty much all the up and down bounce that you get with a gimbal. Steadicam rigs have arms which stop that, but there are third-party accessories which do work pretty well with the gimbals, but they're not as good as this. The reason why is it is part mechanical and part electronic. The mechanical part, I assume, must be something like springs inside it with tension adjustment. The electronic part is from the sensors on the front and bottom of the Ronin 4D. These measured the height, so it uses that information to take away that bounce with the Z-axis. And it really works. I've never shot gimbal footage as steady as this. You've got to make sure the Z-axis is properly dialed in, otherwise it can make your footage look worse. And it isn't for every single situation. Normally I use wide-angle lenses to hide the bounce, but when you're on a longer lens that's not possible. This shot here is with the Suri 35mm anamorphic lens in Super 35mm mode. This gives you a 50mm full frame equivalent, but I think my favourite shots here were with the 35mm Laowa f/0.95 full frame lens. Having that crazy fast aperture and shooting wide open, it just has a really unique look. All of the shots were also using autofocus, even the manual lenses, and that's thanks to one of the numerous incredibly clever things the Ronin 4D has. The Ronin 4D is a remarkable camera system, unlike anything else out there by a long way. Now that doesn't mean it's better than other cameras, it just does more. And when you put together all the key things it can do, it is almost an all-in-one system that makes it truly groundbreaking. So in this next section of the review, I'm going to move slightly away from the stabilization part to break down the core features. During this, you're going to see a lot of shots using the Ronin 4D on a tripod. I will explain what I've done and the pros and cons of this in a bit. The X9 camera module is removable, so you can buy either or both 6K and 8K and really easily switch between them. The image from the full-frame 6K camera is gorgeous, really gorgeous. The log profile is lovely and grades so well. It has a dual native ISO of 800 and 5000. I actually thought it was 4000 for most of my filming. Whoops. I'm not going to go into all the various frame rates and resolution combinations of the camera. There's too many, and you can easily find that on DJI's website. But I will mention a few. It has 3 different codecs: ProRes HQ, ProRes Raw, and a 10-bit H.264, but that's limited to just 4K. And this is the only camera that doesn't fly that can shoot ProRes Raw internally. I can only guess that DJI have come to some sort of financial arrangement with Red to get past their compressed RAW patent. Even Atomos have to pay Red a royalty fee for being able to use ProRes RAW in their recorders. Unfortunately, it's ProRes RAW HQ only and not the standard ProRes RAW, which is more than enough. And likewise, the non-RAW ProRes is HQ only. These result in massive file sizes and are overkill for most people. They are for me. And that's why I found it crazy that Apple put in ProRes HQ in the iPhone 13 Pro. It's utterly ludicrous for an iPhone. It's so much better when we're given options. It can shoot up to 6K 60 frames per second, but that's with a 2.39 to 1 crop, 48 frames per second without the crop. But you will need to use the SSD drive for that. The camera comes with a built-in CF Express Type B slot, but I would really recommend getting the SSD add-on so you can unlock all the frame rate, resolutions, and the ability to record ProRes Raw. Really impressively, DJI have managed to squeeze in 9 individual stops of ND into this little camera. But this isn't a variable ND, so there's no way of smoothly changing the amount of ND. Each stage is a single stop. Taking the time to shoot this sort of footage on a tripod really gave me the ability to look at the camera's lovely image properly. The colours, the dynamic range, and the high frame rates have all impressed me. Although the 4K 100 and 120 frames per second, I wish they were the whole sensor and not Super 35 and not cropped, and they also are noisier. Plus, it would have been nice if they could have squeezed just 2 more frames out of the 6K full frame for us 25p users, so we could get 50p rather than 48. But so far, very positive. But to be a great camera, it needs to be more than these things. A lot more. One thing this camera is not very good at is audio. There are built-in microphones, stereo, pair, and they're behind the gimbal. You get a lot of operating noise, especially if you've got a manual focus lens. You can hear the motor going and it's not good at all. And the camera operating noise as well. There is a 3.5mm input, so you can add your own microphone. Make sure you use a powered microphone. Preamps are absolutely terrible in this. You have to crank them all the way up anyway, so really not very good. You can also get a lot of interference as well when you have the wireless transmission going, so you have to have a shielded microphone. And then there's the problem of where do you put the microphone? If you put it on the handle, it's too far back. There is no way of putting it further forward without some sort of crazy rig. So that is a problem. But there is a Pro module coming, which will give you XLR inputs and a time code, but where are you going to put the microphone still? So there is still that problem. So really it's a dual system audio camera really, and that's what I was doing with the Tentacle sync into the 3.5mm with the audio time code and the Tentacle Track E recorder. Lav mic, that's how I was doing my audio. Audio is a definite weak point of the Ronin 4D. So what's slightly frustrating is the waveform has no opacity, can't make it any smaller than this, and it monitors what's on the screen, so that's the log, that's the LUT, whereas I'd want it to just show me what the log is, because that's what's being recorded. Bit weird really. The cameras come with DJI's DL mount, which was originally made for the X7, which goes on the Inspire 2. Currently there's 3 compatible lenses in that range, the 24, 35 and 50mm, and they're all about 180 grams, which is really light. The downsides are they're quite expensive for f2.8 lenses, and none of them have a close minimum focus. The 35mm, for example, is 85 centimeters. For comparison, one of my favourite video lenses, the Sony FE 35mm f1.8, has a minimum focus of just 30 centimeters. But their big advantage is they are the simplest and most convenient lenses to use, as they require no autofocus calibration and no rebalancing of the gimbal when you switch between them. As I've already mentioned, you aren't limited to this mount because it is removable. There's also a Leica M mount, which is passive because those lenses are full manual, plus that electronic E-mount adapter that supports focus and iris control, but not IS. Other than the weight though, the Ronin 4D's biggest Achilles heel are which lenses you can use. The Z-axis payload is 2 kilograms, and that includes the just over 1 kilogram for the camera and gimbal. So that leaves you just under a kilo for your lens. So the gimbal has very little forward and backwards adjustability, so you can balance it out. This means long lenses are out of the question. The problems I have with the weight of the system, I can get round with a support system. But the lens limitations, that's the single biggest problem with the Ronin 4D. So here are 3 different lenses, around the same focal length. The 35mm DL lens, which weighs just 180 grams. That 35mm f1.8 Sony is 290 grams. And this stunning 40mm t1.5 Tokina Vista Cinema Prime lens, these are lenses that were used to shoot Ted Lasso. Well, that's a whopping 2.24 kilograms, which of course completely obliterates the payload. See, these are the sort of lenses that dramas and high-end commercial shoots would use. But why am I even bringing this up? Well, this Tokina Vista 65mm, also T1.5, is on my Sony Alpha 1 here, on the DJI RS2. The RS2 has a payload of roughly 3 kilograms. That is for the camera and lens. This setup here is actually slightly more than that, but it does work absolutely fine. Yes, there is no Z-axis on the RS2, apart from those third-party ones, but you can take the weight, as the camera can be adjusted forward and backwards to balance it. And that's thanks to the nice low position of the rear motor. In fact, you can get a really long heavy lens on there if you want to. This is the DJI Ronin RS2 with the Sony A7C and a 200 to 600 millimeter lens, and it's balanced. Why? Because it felt impossible. Will I ever use it? No. It just shows you what the RS2 and RSC2 are capable of that Ronin 4D cannot come anywhere close to. So if you are used to certain lenses with your current camera and gimbal setup, then you are very likely to find these lens limitations very limiting. You can use heavier and longer lenses when you're on a tripod and you lock down all the axes, but it is still a bit wobbly. This is the amazing new Sony 70-200 f2.8 GM Mark II, and it's just over 1 kilogram. So if it wasn't so long, you might just be able to get away with using it on the Ronin 4D. But of course, it's too long, so you can't. The E-mount for the Ronin 4D does not support optical stabilization, so you can really see the rolling shutter jello when I was touching the camera. So if I wanted to use the camera tripod with longer, heavier lenses, absolutely need lens support. And this is a very strange form factor that doesn't lend itself to easily having lens support. So now that I've added the rod support, it's so much better and it is usable as a tripod camera, sort of. The LiDAR doesn't work, this gets in the way, and it doesn't really work with zoom lenses either. So there is that. And this is all a bit of a faff. Changing lenses is a faff. But it's just to see what the potential it could be like. And that potential is sizable. But I've got to move now because the Thames is coming up. That's why it looks so pretty. That's because the water's right by my feet. I know it's been a while since you saw any gimbal footage, and there is more to come, but you already know just how good it is in that area. You see, when I first heard about this camera, I wondered if it was good enough to entirely replace a traditional camera. Whilst it can be used on a tripod, as I've shown, it is more cumbersome than, say, my Sony FX6 or Red Komodo. And shooting handheld is possible, but far from ideal due to its weight, and if you put it on your shoulder, the camera would be sitting very high. Again, not ideal. Look, it's being marketed as a gimbal camera, and it's clear that's where its strength lies. But if you need to use it on a tripod, then yes, it's absolutely doable. I've been working on this review for a very long time. Instead of doing things in a methodical, planned way, I find myself getting lost, overcomplicating things, losing focus. Everything takes 10 times longer than it should. I don't know, I just always feel like I can do something better. I don't quite know why I feel like this. I'm not sure if it's a lack of confidence or insecurity. I certainly do feel I can only put out something which is as good as it possibly can be. But that is completely draining. And when I need help, I often turn to Skillshare, who are the sponsor of this video, to see if there is something that can help me get back on track. This fascinating and insightful course by Jonathan Van Ness had some really excellent advice that really got me thinking about what I do and why.
And then I realized that I am worthy of your time, and I'm worthy of sharing what I've come to learn with you. And then this, deeper part of me came up and said, wait, girl, you're kind of fun.
There's so many courses on Skillshare that cover so many varied topics, and there's always new ones being added, so it always feels fresh. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, which could not just help your creativity, but things you never thought about trying before. Right, so Jonathan, I need to get back to the edit. There are people waiting for this review. The next two biggest features of the Ronin 4D are the LiDAR autofocus system and the incredible wireless transmission and control. Both of them were way better than I expected, like seriously better. Unlike the best autofocus you can get in video from Sony and Canon, there's no on-sensor phase detection points. So you have to use the LiDAR sensor, which you mount on top of the camera. The sensor emits a rapidly firing laser, and that light is reflected back. The time it takes is used to calculate the distance, and it creates a 3D map which is continually updating. In fact, if you bring up the LiDAR waveform, amazingly you can see this top-down view of what's in front of you. And it can see up to 10 meters away, which is the maximum distance of the system, which is one of the limitations of LiDAR, whereas phase detection can go way further. You can use this LiDAR waveform to pull focus manually really accurately, and it's actually quite brilliant, and it's light years better than focus peaking and punching in to check the focus. Unfortunately, on the camera I've been testing in some of the high quality frame rates, as soon as you hit record it vanishes, and I don't know if that's going to change. With the DL and electronic E-mount lenses, the autofocus is done electronically, whereas manual lenses need the focus gears and the focus motor to work. Apart from the DL lenses, every lens that you're going to put on there will need calibrating first. There's two key things about LiDAR that set it apart from other autofocus systems. First off, you can use it to control manual lenses. And secondly, you don't need light to make it work. Whereas most other cameras, you do need light, so it gets really dark and it starts failing. But with LiDAR, it's not using anything on the sensor. It's a separate system, and it is working really well on me on a very extreme lens, the Laowa 35 0.95, because if you can, you will, right? Don't worry, I'm not going to shoot everything on this lens from now on, but I just like the fact that I can use it, because I've been trying to use it to film my cats and stuff, and anything that's moving is just impossible. But right now it's just fantastic, and I really love that you can keep a subject in focus at f0.95 on a full frame sensor, 35mm. That is clever technology. When in smart mode, the camera will automatically pick up faces and you can track them with a press of the button on the grip or touch the screen. For anything else you want to track that isn't a human, you need to touch the screen, draw around the subject. It's not perfect though. The biggest issue I found is it has no finesse, especially when going from one subject to another. Even in the slow mode, it just jumps. I'm sure firmware can improve this over time. And of course, this is new technology. So, you have to expect that. You do have touch focus too, but this isn't for focus racks, as it's just too fast. For me to use autofocus on a paid job, I have to be able to trust it. For manual focus with the LiDAR waveform, the Ronin 4D is fantastic. And yes, the ability to use manual lenses is very, very good. But for the actual autofocus reliability, it still has a long way to go. The autofocus performance in the latest Canon and Sony cameras is just amazing, and they've had many years to get there. Their ability to track subjects in really challenging situations is amazing. Like this jogger using the Sony a7S III and the 200 to 600mm lens. The main problems with LiDAR are that distance, and also the fact it really only works with prime lenses. So I think it's alright. I mean, I've started a bit further than 10 meters away. I don't think it's in, no, I think it is in focus now. So yeah, this works well, yeah. I think LiDAR has a big part to play in the future of autofocus. If it could be combined with on-sensor phase detection, it would be amazing. The wireless transmission system, with its huge range, fantastic quality, and this fantastic monitor and ability to control the camera from this, one of my favourite features of the system, probably my favourite feature of the system. And it's a shame it doesn't come with it, so you're going to have to budget that into it. I think you'll be missing out if you don't get this. And look, there's a train. See, the remote control is quite handy, but you're not really going to be filming yourself much like this. This is really for just, having the camera away from you. Exactly 1 year earlier, to the hour, I was at the same spot with the DJI RS2 doing almost identical tests. This was entirely coincidental and rather spooky, especially as about 3 hours after this, when I was doing some last shots in Richmond, my secure car was broken into, and this camera, this gimbal, and lots of other stuff were stolen from me. Whilst I never got any of my gear back, of course, my insurance did cover most of it. That wasn't a good day a year ago. To control the RS2 remotely like this and to use active track mode meant using the app on my phone. With the Ronin 4D, it's rather a big step up. So the thing is, it needs to know when to stop tracking and when to stop focusing. One's easy. Look at that composition. Who did that? Headroom, headroom. Active track, like the one you get on DJI's drones and their other gimbals, is really made for when the camera is moving, so you can keep your subject in frame perfectly, automatically without you having to have too many skills. I did find that even when I was moving, it wasn't reacting in a natural way. It felt like it was playing catch up. None of the gimbal settings affect the tracking mode. They're only for when operating manually. A bit of warp stabilizer can fix this for now. DJI said they will be improving this. Most likely it will have a follow speed setting like the RS2 and the other gimbals have. Now what it can't do that your Ronin, RS2 etc. can do with the tracking is it can't spin round because, well, basically the rest of the camera gets in the way. In the past 14 years or so, I've reviewed a lot of cameras before they were released, and there's always things which aren't quite right. It's just a shame that I can't show you all the features working as well as I hope. Well, I'm pretty certain they will be. The time I would most likely have a DJI gimbal on a tripod is for programmable moves, for motion control. But as of right now, there are none. This is something that will come later. That's what DJI said. as I couldn't test out this feature, let's talk about the wireless control system, as it really is special. This monitor that you can attach the side grips to, just as a viewing device or for control like I have right now, is wonderful. I can come off of autofocus, in theory, and I can turn it back on again. I can go into manual focus. I have control over tracking. I have the ability to change my exposure. This is easily the most elegant and impressive built-in wireless viewing and control system that I've used. And they quote a transmission range of about 6 kilometers. Now I can totally believe this, as their drones have such exceptional ranges. But this is for unobstructed line of sight and with no Wi-Fi interference. In my basic tests, it worked really well and with minimal lag. But I really needed to see how it coped through walls. In particular, the walls from my Victorian home, which are not like modern walls. I set up the Ronin 4D in my catio, with it pointing at one of the many workmen who seem to be working on about a dozen houses right now, making recording voiceovers quite challenging. So I had something to compare it to. I plugged in my Axoon Cine i2 Pro into the HDMI out of the camera. This doesn't quote a range anywhere near as far, but it's probably the best one that I own, and it's very good, plus it is also Wi-Fi based. So with a ridiculous rig consisting of the remote monitor and hand grips, I connected the Cine i2 Pro receiver to the HDMI in of the Sony Xperia Pro, so I could see how well it was doing. The last time I went out with a rig as silly as this was for my Axoon video. And a guy in the street stopped me because he thought I was a burglar casing the area for places to rob. Right. So the curse of the Victorian walls struck straight away at the front of my house. Just 3 of them proved too much for both systems. When the Axoon loses the signal, it just cuts out. Whereas the Ronin will give you a progressively blockier image. I still had camera control, but could you imagine pulling focus when your image is blockier than the large kids' Lego bricks? Yeah, that's somewhat challenging. When I went round to the side, both system signals came and went. There was still no clear line of sight, but I couldn't have been more than 50 meters away. When I tested the Axoon's range with an almost clear line of sight, I managed to get a signal 465 meters away. Now I didn't do the same test with the Ronin, as I had nobody to help on this, and I wasn't going to leave it on a tripod in the middle of the park. And I'm sure it would have been better based on my experience with their drones. But I think it's actually very likely the pre-production nature of this system was a big part of the issues I was having. So this test really needs to be redone with a production model. And not just this test, I really do hope I get a chance to put a production model through its paces, see how it performs, see how different it is, and also the 8K camera, because I'm really interested in just how that looks. So is this something that, is interesting, is something that you should buy? I'm not going to tell you, I will never tell you to buy something. I can just tell you what I think about a product. I'm thinking the people who are looking at this will already have a gimbal already, and probably have a very decent gimbal like an RS2, and you've got a really nice camera to go with it. So you need to look at, are you happy with that? Does this offer you stuff which you really want? I mean, the key thing is going to be the Z-axis, for example. That's a huge thing. The other thing you need to look at is the lenses that you use. If you use longer, heavier lenses that may not go on this, which could be, well, will be a big factor. So what else does this offer you? The wireless transmission system. So that's where you need to look at how much it costs. The 6K combo, which comes with a battery but no wireless, is about £6,000 or so. The 8K when it comes out later in the year will be about 9,000. The wireless transmission part of it will be about £300 or so. And the monitor, which you obviously use to control it, is going to be about 1,100. And I think I need to double check how much the SSD is. The SSD is going to be about £600. So you have to factor in all these costs and whether it's worth it for you to have this dedicated system, because it is going to give you, from my limited use of the stabilization, pretty much some of the best stabilized footage you're going to get. And it's all in one, it's ready to go. It's the weight, it's the lenses, and it's the cost. These are all factors that you need to look at. I can't tell you what to do. It's not my job. You have to applaud DJI for bringing out something so different, so innovative, so clever. And that's exactly what this is. It is incredibly clever. There's so much about it which is just on the cutting edge. And that is fantastic, even if you don't use it as a gimbal. Because that, for me right now, that is the biggest problem, because it is heavy. This is the Ready Rig GS with the Pro Arm kit. It is designed for the heavier gimbals, up to 17 kilograms. The Ronin 4D is nowhere near that, of course, but this is clearly the way forward for me to use this properly. It's not cheap, but it's incredibly well made. Suddenly, the Ronin 4D barely weighed anything. It's not as low profile a way of shooting as I like, but it really is the only way for me. And if you can take any advice from this old man, let it be this one. It's better to avoid getting a back injury than having to find ways to live with them.